In this video, we're going to continue to look at the capabilities of stepper NG, or next generation. And in particular, we're going to look at the conditional capabilities as well as pre and post validation steps. So you'll see that I have just a contrived example here. This is not a real scenario. I have 3 of the same GET request targeting Portswigger's Gin and Juice Shop. And I have a dummy parameter in the query string for each of these, just to label them: request 1, request 2, request 3. In the middle request, I'm actually pulling a variable, the CSRF value returned in the response, and I have that published such that I can reference it in repeater in this login request. So I have my reference here, so I can reference it, and that will invoke the sequence. So the reference here indicates that this is a stepper variable. We indicate the sequence name and then the actual variable name. So now when I click send here, I should get 200 OKs, and I do. And what's happening there, if we look in Logger, we can see that before each of those repeater requests are sent, because I'm referencing that published variable, it's going to invoke that sequence. That sequence is running 3 requests, and the middle one, I'm extracting the CSRF token value, so we can find that in the response here. If I look for it, it's quite straightforward. You don't really have to do this in this scenario. I'm just using this to illustrate some of the capabilities within stepper NG. So let's look at those capabilities now. One addition to stepper NG that you can see up in the top of the UI here is the capability to implement these nice little conditionals. So if I go to my first request here and I set the condition to if status line matches 200, then skip the remaining steps. And of course, this response is always going to be 200. Well, maybe not always, but in this case, it should be. We expect it to be. And I go back to repeater now, and I click send. We are going to experience a very different behavior. I go to Logger, and I can see that only 1 request is being sent. Because it gets to this request, and then it fails to send the subsequent request because the response for that request is 200. Now, you'll also see a really interesting behavior here in that we're not sending the second request, which is the request that gets the CSRF token for us to use, and yet my login requests still seem to succeed with valid CSRF tokens. So where do those tokens come from? Well, if I copy that and I search in my Logger history here for that token, we can see that it has been derived from the previous login request rather than the second request of the sequence. This is something that I find a little bit confusing, and it doesn't seem to be configurable. So what's happening here is in stepper NG, when we declare that this variable is published, that not only lets us use that variable in a way that invokes this flow, but that also turns on the capability in stepper to automatically grab that variable from responses when it sees it. So instead of getting that variable from our request and response here in our flow, it also sees that in the response in our login request, because the login request, when it succeeds, it also returns a CSRF value. It doesn't seem like there's a way right now to configure stepper NG to only extract this variable from the specific response in the sequence, which could get a little bit confusing, I imagine, in some situations, but probably in most scenarios, that's a nice convenience feature. But I did find that a little bit confusing at first. The preferences don't offer that at the moment, unless I'm misunderstanding how they work. And of course, we don't have anything explicitly declared in our global variables, which was the mechanism that I showed in a video previously for how to declare variables that are outside of a sequence that have that same behavior of matching requests or responses. I didn't talk about static variables, but you can also define global statics. But the dynamic ones, you declare them to match values using regular expressions in requests and responses across Burp tools. Of course, if you go to the preferences, you can configure tool usage for variables. It's not clear, and I haven't experimented with whether that affects the actual grabbing of those values from requests and responses, but there's no specific way that I can find to actually turn off this from matching outside of this very specific step within the sequence. So that's something to be aware of. But that's how conditionals work. They're very straightforward. You don't turn them on or off just by providing a value here. You can see that turns off, removing the value turns off the conditional, adding a value turns on the conditional. It's very simple, very straightforward to use. There's also a retry mechanism that I haven't experimented with, but the other two things that you should know about are the pre-validation step and the post-validation step. Now, the pre-validation step, if you set this, it adds an initial conditional to determine whether the sequence runs, and I'm not fully understanding why that needs to be separate from the base conditionals, because we can just do that, right? We can skip the remaining steps anyways. I think there's probably some different behavior there, but I think for most cases you can just use the built-in conditionals. But with the post-validation step, there is a very interesting capability here, and actually it's a very interesting capability because it lets you, if you're running some type of scan, detect whether something has gone awry with your session handling mechanism. Let's say you're using stepper ng to maintain some type of active session. Well, if you know what failure conditions are that might spontaneously occur, you can actually set a post-validation step that will trigger turning off Burp's scanning capabilities, right? It disables the task execution engine directly within Burp. So the way that works is if it has a certain number of failure cases, and actually we can set those number of failure cases. If you click on the sequence here, you'll see it will pop up a max post-validation fails, which right now is set to 3. So we set a conditional on this. Let's say we expect it to match 301 and anything else is a failure. So of course we get 200 by default. So that's going to be a failure if we execute this 3 times. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to repeater. We don't have that initial conditional. So when I run repeater, we should have our baseline capability where if I remove my filter here in logger, we should see that whole sequence run and then our repeat request. And crucially, that third request is returning a 200 OK, which is not in line with our expectation for request 3, which I said it should match a 301. So if I return to repeater and I send it again, no issue. That's 2 attempts. I send it again, that's 3 attempts. And look at this, session broken. So that post-validation step has determined that our session mechanism has been broken according to the rule set that we have set. And I'll click OK on that. And if you go to the dashboard, you'll see that this has automatically paused task execution. So this actually seems like a really handy feature if you're running automated scans. Intruder attacks are also blocked by turning off Burp's task execution engine. So there are lots of things that you can do where you can build in this type of check to determine if something has gone awry and your session handling mechanism has failed, then you can just automatically turn that off. That seems super helpful. Some of the other capabilities, a little bit confusing, and maybe there's a lack of some configurability, but otherwise great improvements upon the original stepper, and I'm sure you will find use cases for these in your testing workflows.